Let's start. Well, I'm Badr Benjloun, glad for hosting you in this new webinar of the INRA webinar series dedicated to discuss trends and innovations in agriculture. I would like to welcome all the participants from different countries, maybe, for taking the time to attend this webinar and probably also to enrich this session by their questions and comments. Before we start, I want to ask all the participants via Zoom, please mention your full names and affiliations in your ID in this session. For people who are not familiar with Zoom, you can click on participants in the bottom of your Zoom window, then click on your name and select more, then rename, and you can add the text that you want. So we will wait 5 minutes, then my colleagues will reject the participants who are not identified at all. Thanks for your understanding. So I will give directly the floor to my colleague, Dr. Iman Tamir Alami, the head of the scientific division at INRA, who will welcome and introduce our guest speaker and also the topic of our webinar. So the floor is yours, Dr. Tamir Alami.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bud. We are happy to have with us Dr. Stefanie Christmann. Is a senior scientist. She worked on environmental governance in the various positions. And since 2009, she works in the International Center of Agriculture Research in Dry Area, known as ICARDA. First in Central Asia, in Uzbekistan, since 2015 in Morocco. Based on TEB approach, shows the value of ecosystem services and use to its trigger intrinsic in motivation for better protection of ecosystem services. She developed several economically self-sustaining environmental governance approaches to protect biodiversity in the course of climate change. Farming with alternative pollinators, 2012, is her most important innovation. This method, FAP, farming with alternative pollinators, rewarding schemes for farms due to high income per surface and includes cross-sector policy instruments affordable for low and middle income countries. Stefanie coordinates a regional AKA project introducing the FIP approach, conservation of pollinator diversity of enhanced climate change resilience. In 2017, between 2017 and 2023, benchmark country Morocco. FAP has potential to become a globally scalable model for pollinator protection. I will stop and give the floor to our colleague, Dr. Stefanie. The floor is yours.
So before, just a moment, just to mention the organization of the webinar, please, Dr. Tamir, thanks for this nice introduction. So I would like to mention that the main talk will take up to 30 minutes, and then we will have the Q&A session that will take up to 20 minutes. For the discussion, please post your written questions via the chat on Zoom. Please do not wait until the end of the webinar, of the conference, to ask them. You can post your questions in English and also in French. So we look forward to listening to you, Dr. Christmann. Thanks. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So I will talk today on the protection of honeybees and wild pollinators in the course of climate change, and on the example of Morocco. Pollinator protection is mostly an issue in high-income countries, because the research on pollinators is focused on these rich countries, and also the protection measures are very costly, and low and middle income countries cannot afford them. State of the art are seeded wildflower strips. Wildflowers are weeds in the language of farmers, and the farmers get paid for providing this service. The European community spends billions on such schemes for decades, but though the decline is extremely rapid. Morocco decided already in 2019 to work on pollinator protection, and joined the coalition of the willing on pollinators in May 2019 as first Arab countries. And you see, it's really a small group of forerunner countries. Morocco is very rich in pollinator diversity by now. It has 3 different honeybee species, more than 930 bee species, around 145 identified hoverfly species, and many others. But we don't know if within 20 years these species will be still around. Currently, we have an alarming decline of honeybees in certain regions, and this might just be the visible peak of the iceberg. And we have also high decline in diversity and abundance of wild pollinators. Nobody knows this currently, but we should analyze it. Climate change is a serious risk factor for pollinators. Let's first talk on honeybees. If the temperature is in winter too low, then they don't learn to dance and to communicate. When the temperatures in summer in the hive is too high, they just abandon the brood and flee forever. So as temperatures increase in Morocco, we should analyze the robustness of the 3 Moroccan bee species concerning summer temperatures, and maybe develop a simple cold insulation for the hives. Other risk factors for pollinators in the course of climate change are, for instance, seasonal abnormalities. If it's too cold, too rainy, or too stormy, they cannot fly. Also, the period of strong heat at noon might be extended. And due to rain, storm, or high temperature, fruit trees can, for instance, lose their flowers very quickly. All these causes a food problem for workers and lack of pollen for the next generation. Additionally, we have the degradation of agricultural lands. Monocultures reduce the food diversity for pollinators, and this weakens their health and the multitude of offspring and the resistance of the next generation. Another issue of climate change is increasing drought. It reduces the possibility of pollinators to find clean water to drink. And if they drink water with a high concentration of agricultural chemicals, such as glyphosate, they can get blurred in their mind, and they don't find the way back to their hive. The monocultures are like a desert, like Sahara for us. Besides the problem with a higher load of pesticides in monocultures, other habitat requirements are not met. Pollinators, wild pollinators need nectar and pollen over all seasons. They need nesting sites and materials close by. They need water and shelter against wind. So here in cereal fields, there is no forage, no nesting site and material. There's really nothing. And even such modern orchards cannot sustain pollinators because the flowering period might be for 2 weeks, but not longer. Afterwards, they starve. You see tillage everywhere. So no nesting sites for ground nesting pollinators, and there is no old wood or hollow stems for cavity nesters. There is no water, no shelter. So if we continue to develop such landscapes, we will face heavy pollinator decline here in Morocco. This is even more serious when we take the radius of activity of pollinators into consideration. Honeybees fly up to 5,000 meters. And when you take the support by beekeepers, the transport of hives, additionally, you see that they really are quite mobile and can use the resources of different areas. But wild pollinators, they like bumblebees, they fly up to 2,000 meters. But most wild pollinators are in an area of 50 to 150 or 200 meters around their nest. So if there is no forage, or if this area is suddenly exposed to massive pesticides, they cannot survive. So the dependency and the vulnerability of wild pollinators is much higher than of honeybees, which also get the nest, the hive, by the beekeeper, so that I'm afraid that the decline of honeybees we see in Morocco is just the peak of the iceberg. Around 70% of all wild bees, that's the most important pollinators, nearly all solitary bees and many surfids nest in the ground. If farmers use a lot of chemicals over years, this gets a very toxic mixture in the soil. Most aggressive are neonicotinoids, and people think they are in the flower and they affect the flying biomass, but most of all, they affect the ground nesting pollinators, because around 94% of neonicotinoids rest in soil. So this is a nest of a ground nesting bee. In general, they build such a tunnel and many different nesting cells. Some even build several tunnels. And if you have a lot of neonicotinoids, the female exposed to this chemical load is able only to make one nest cell, and then often it dies. So the offspring is highly reduced. We have very interesting studies on this phenomenon in Canada. The pesticides are just one problem, but additionally, we have the soil compaction by heavy machinery in the monocultures, and we have deep tillage and several types of tillage. So some species make tunnels up to 95 or centimeter. And if you have tillage on 30 meters later, everything is cut. Yeah, and the offspring cannot emerge anymore. Or with heavy machinery, everything is smashed. The larvae are smashed, the tunnel system is smashed. So if you have all these issues in monocultures, the offspring of ground nesting pollinators is extremely reduced. And The cavity nesters, which need old wood or hollow stems, they don't nest in these areas anymore. They live in forests. Anyway, the monocultures depend on honeybees and the ground nesting pollinators, and they are very much at risk. So what has to be done to safeguard them? First of all, the pesticide risk assessments analyzing impacts should analyze impacts of a different on a mix of different ground nesting pollinators. Currently, they are done on honeybees, which don't nest in the soil and have a lot of support by beekeepers. And they also don't take the mixture of pesticides in the soil into consideration. So we need much better pesticide risk assessment. This is something a country or a farmer can not address this problem, but we work on this problem on international level because FAO has to make a better regulation. But what we all can do, and I address all people who are listening now and who might see later the video, we all can engage in knowledge-raising campaigns concerning ground nesting pollinators on their importance and the risks and what to do. And to do this we should promote at least one dedicated area without second tillage, heavy machinery and pesticides each square meter of arable land to save them also in monocultures. I know this is quite difficult, but we should try that. And wherever you have, for instance, here such very nice cactus corridors, keep them because below there is no tillage and it's a good nesting ground. Why it is so important, in particular for a country in the drylands like Morocco, to protect pollinators. Here you see the different dependency of agriculture on pollinators in 1961 and 2012. And you see that here Morocco gets much more red, so much more pollinator dependent. Why? Because the farmers are intelligent. If they use, for instance, 1 cubic meter of water for wheat, for barley, or for maize, they have much less revenue than if they use this cubic meter, for instance, for apricot. So they go for the high value crops, high value concerning income in comparison to the drop. This is an adaptation strategy to climate change. And of course, our farmers do that. I said earlier, we have to improve the knowledge on pollinators. When people hear about pollinators, they think on the value of honey. But this is a research from Jordan. The value of pollination for agriculture is 26 times as high as the value of honey in Jordan. When you look on entire Africa, this is a study of FAO, it's 100 times. Because many crops are highly dependent on pollinators. For instance, watermelon, zucchini, pumpkin. If you produce these flowers without pollinators, you have up to 90% less production. For apple, mango, avocado, it's 40 to 90%, and so on. And if we would have to make our living just on barley, wheat, maize, chickpea, and so on, we would really suffer from malnutrition. So we have to protect these crops, which also give a good revenue per drop of water. When we talk with kids, we make it simple. This is a breakfast with pollinators, and this is a breakfast without pollinators. We did about 1,000 questionnaires in 4 countries, including Morocco, with pupils of grade 8 on their knowledge on pollinators, on pollination, on the value of pollinators, and so on. And we asked which animals are most important for mankind and suggested 7. And they thought that cows are more important than pollinators. Pollinators rank more or less equally with chicken, fish, and sheep, so not that high. This shows that the kids and probably the entire population don't know that pollinators have key functions in 4 aspects. First, agriculture. 87% of the most important food crops for human consumption require pollinators. Second, biodiversity of species and habitats. 87% of all flowering plants require an insect pollinator. And the loss of pollinators causes a cascade of extinction on plant level, later on animal level, because they feed on these insects and on the plants, and in the end of habitats. Third, climate change adaptation, because cross-pollination enhances genetic diversity of plants and thus increases the chances of plants to adapt to higher temperatures. Here in the drylands, additionally, we have the point that many pollinator-dependent crops give higher revenue per drop of water than pollinator-independent crops. And the last point is probably the most important. Because 87% of all flowering plants require an insect pollinator, all pollination services are basic for all other ecosystem services. And if we lose pollinators, this can cause multiple interlinked poverty spirals. Why? 87% of flowering plants need a pollinator. Many of them are medicinal plants, which we need for drugs. Many are important to clean water or for fibers, cotton, linen, and so on. For landscape, which we use for recreation, for agriculture. If we have, without pollinators, if we live in such a degraded landscape like below, it's very hard to survive. And additionally, we get a lot of clothes and items which we have to produce from plastic because we don't have the raw materials from nature anymore. So the world would change drastically. If I explain the same on a higher level, then here in bright green, you see all the ecosystem services provided by 87% of flowering plants. So if we lose biological control, local climate and air regulation, raw materials, genetic diversity, and so on, we have a problem with food. We get a deterioration of health. We have to invest more in erosion control. We might have labor migration because in some areas, in particular in mountains, people cannot make their living anymore. We get social insecurity. We get high food insecurity. We get poverty all around. And there might be fights or war for regions which still produce good food. So when we come back to the study of Jordan, when we imagine what is the value of pollination for all ecosystem services, the circle might be much bigger than the one even for agriculture and for sure for the value of honey. But this figure has never been assessed. It will be very difficult, but I'm sure that the circle is bigger than what I show here. But as long as people don't know that pollinators are so important for us, as long as they don't recognize which insects are beneficial, only 2% are plant parasites. Most of the insects are beneficial. As long as they don't know the habitat requirements, they will not contribute to the protection and the decline will go on. Knowledge is the precondition for protection. And our project shall develop a science and knowledge-based model for pollinator protection, which is scalable in low and middle income countries. So,
therefore, about 10 years ago, I developed farming with alternative pollinators, briefly FAP, to motivate farmers for habitat enhancement by better income. So in FAP, we use 75%, here the dark green area, 75% of the field for the main crop and 25% for habitat enhancement by marketable habitat enhancement plant, like oilseeds, spices, other crops or forage crops, and nesting support out of local materials and water. And then we compare the impact of habitat enhancement on diversity, on the abundance of pollinators, natural enemies and pests, and on net income per surface in comparison to control fields, which have the main crop in 100% of the field.
So this is how the fields look. All photos are from Morocco. You see that the marketable habitat enhancement plants give a flower to the landscape, so it's nice for walking. But most of all, they prolong the flowering period of the fields, and the prolonged flowering period is a prolonged period for production and also for pest control. Here below, you see fields from Youssef. He's PhD student in our project, and he tested FAP in large-scale fields on three different crops, two pollinator dependent and on wheat. And in all crops, he had higher income. But for the results, we have to wait with because he has to finalize his PhD. Here we see the results of the trials with smallholders. Here in Morocco, we did 31 trials in 4 different agroecosystems with 7 main crop and more than 230 smallholders. And because the fields, the FAP fields have more different flower petals, more colors, a longer flowering season, the diversity of wild pollinators is higher in all FAP fields in the top graphs. In the middle, you see the diversity of the natural enemies, which is also higher in FAP fields than in control fields. But when you look on the diversity of pests, this was higher in the control fields. The pest abundance in the main crop was reduced on average by 65%. And this shows that FAP can work as a nature-positive preventive pest control. And I would suggest that Dr. Smaili from INRA, who did these analysis, can present in another webinar more details on this important issue. The higher diversity of pollinators induces more pollination, and the higher quantity of flowers develop a fruit. For some crops like cucumber, eggplant, apple, or strawberry, also the quality is better, so the farmer gets higher income per kg. So we said we measure the impact on net income. In FAP fields, the net income was 121% higher on average. This is a really good incentive for farmers to use this approach. We simulated if more smallholders use FAP, what is the impact on food production and food security, and what is the impact on land use. And it shows that FAP has high potential for agroecological intensification and combat of malnutrition, and can support a lot to bend the curve of agriculture grabbing more and more semi-natural lands, which reduces the areas for biodiversity and also for human recreation. It's very important to bend this curve and to produce ecologically intensified in the land which we use already for agriculture. So in total, FAP contributes to 5 sustainable development goals. First, combat of poverty, because farmers have higher income, which can promote rural development. Then combat of hunger. We have higher production of nutrient-rich food per surface and higher food security. Better health. As the pests are reduced by natural pest control, we have healthier food with less chemicals. With a 65% reduction of pests in the main crop, many farmers decide not to use chemicals at all because it's investment, it's time, and it doesn't improve the product. We have better health also because the landscape becomes more attractive for recreation, also for ecotourism and so on. Then we have climate action. Because cross-pollination is sustained, the climate change resilience of landscapes is enhanced. The more diversity of plants you have, the better the landscape can adapt to climate change. And we have protection of biodiversity because we protect pollinators. All ecosystem services are sustained on high level, and we have protection of plants, animals, and of habitats. So we did a lot to communicate this approach here in Morocco. We trained more than 270 agricultural advisors from ONCA and prepared a lot of materials for them, videos, brochures in Arabic. You can download them from our project website, and you can also ask ONCA. All ONCA offices now can give advice on FAP. We also did several films, also in Arabic, which you can find. And INRA and ICARDA trained NAS from 5 other countries, which implement now their FAP projects. Also, as we think knowledge is the key for protection, we developed 5 modules for curriculum units and did a workshop with 6 countries and their curriculum units, suggested these modules, translated them to national languages, and now they look at how they can integrate these modules into their curricula to enhance the knowledge of the entire population. So in total, if several ministries contribute a little bit in their own authority, you can protect pollinators in a very cost-effective way. For instance, enhancing knowledge, we have the curriculum change, Ministry for Education, and for instance, if Ministry for Communication and Information, several broadcasts on pollinators several times per year in mass media, it also helps a lot to enhance the knowledge. Then, if Ministry for Agriculture promotes FAP, as Morocco does currently through ONCA, and works on an ambitious regulation for pesticides, it contributes a lot to pollinator protection. Ministry for the Environment here in Morocco already joined the coalition of the willing, and we currently discuss on monitoring pollinator diversity and abundance. Our Ministry for Tourism, if they would do a yearly competition, one for urban areas, one for rural areas, which local community performs best on pollinator protection and would promote this community for 1 year for ecotourism, this could inspire many communities to enhance their environment for pollinators. Or, for instance, Ministry for Interior, if they would ban the destruction of useful landscape architecture. This is, for instance, deadwood, which is used as a bee hotel, or, for instance, the cactus corridors, or small areas of fallow land near roads with a lot of flower diversity. All this is useful landscape architecture which should be protected. And in this way, we have a pollinator protection which is based on knowledge. The entire population gets aware and engaged for pollinator protection, and we have sustainable society. And this is something on a much higher and sustainable level than the costly protection measures which are used in Europe and America, which really cost billions. And this we try to realize in Morocco and in the other participating countries. Yeah, thank you for your attention, and I'm curious on your questions. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Christmann, for this rich talk. Really, it's very interesting, which highlighted the risk caused by climate change and intensive farming practices for pollinators in general, and also the measures that have to be taken to enhance the environment for pollinators, and also the efforts that you make for communication around this initiative. So yeah, please, I cannot see any question for now. You can ask your question directly in the chat, and also you can, if you wish, if you can ask your question orally, you can do it. Please raise your electronic hand. There is maybe a first question from my colleague, Dr. Muha Farrahi. He says, you are aware about the honeybees collapses lately in Morocco. Do you have any answers for this noticed collapse? Dr. Christmann?
Yeah, I didn't find the micro, sorry.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, I discussed with some experts because the Jordanian Bee Research Institute had the same problem a year ago in the northern area. And they think they had drought, that it was from overuse of glyphosate, and that the pollinators did not have clean water. And I talked with experts in Germany as well, and they have the same assumption, but ask to do more research on it. I want to show one slide again. Do you see my screen or not?
Yes, we see. You can make it as full screen.
Okay.
It's okay now.
So here we had this bottle, yeah? This is water support, very simple, which we make out of a 5-liter water bottle, which is cut in the middle. And then we fill little stones inside. And we put 1.5 liter bottle inside, water bottle inside, and fill this with water. So the water drops down to the lower, bigger water bottle, and the pollinators can sit on the stones and drink. And even if it's in summer, if this is filled every 3-4 weeks, it's sufficient. So this is something very simple. Each school kid can do that. And farmers can do it, and local communities can do that. So if there is drought, or wherever there are beehives, I would recommend to put clean water for drinking.
Okay. So we have another question. So can you recall the crops depending on pollinators? You presented already this in a slide, maybe, or in many slides. Yeah. You are muted, Dr. Stefanie.
We have, for instance, most cucumbites and kiwi, they are the most dependent group. There are four groups and the independent. Then we have, for instance, cucumber, buckwheat, apple, plum, canola, mango, avocado, blackberries, coriander, pear, apricot, raspberry, cherries, peach, rosehip, nectarine, cashew, almond. 40 to 90% dependent on pollinators. The medium group is okra, eggplant, fig, strawberry, pomegranate, red currant, blackcurrant, sunflower, mustard, faba bean, soybean, cardamom, pigeon pea, fennel seed. There are many others, but we just reduce to those which are more popular here in Morocco. But I want to mention that, for instance, each crop has also its specific pollinator. For instance, the fig, there is only one wild wasp, Blastophagus psensis, which pollinates fig. We have them here in Morocco, but if we would lose them, we cannot produce high quality figs anymore. We still have figs, but not the nice one. In the same way, for instance, chocolate depends also on a few wild pollinators. And if we lose them, we will not have cacao and chocolate anymore. So also, for instance, mint, this has a very special flower type. There are only pollinators with a very long nose, as I had on my last slide, which can pollinate a flower type like mint. Or let's take the flower of faba bean. It's very close. It's the fabaceae. And honeybees, for instance, cannot pollinate them. It's bumblebees or xylocopa, a very strong wild bees which can pollinate these crops.
Okay.
So I think we need really the full diversity, and we cannot depend just on honeybees to pollinate all flowers. For instance, if cherries, they flower very early. Cherries are here in the second group. If it's too cold, the honeybees will not fly, even when the hive is around, or if it's too rainy. But for instance, bumblebees or mason bees, they might fly. So for us, it's much better to protect the high diversity of pollinators, to be on the safe side with all our crop diversity and the diversity in nature.
Okay, thanks. There is a comment from Badia Al-Yusi. We should build a synergy between agricultors and beekeepers to promote monitoring of pollinators.
Yes, this is true. This is true. I tried for a long time to organize a meeting also with beekeepers. It's not that easy, But we plan also, INRA will invite for that, for a policy workshop where we hopefully can bring the different stakeholders together, because we need joint efforts in monitoring, but also in protection.
Mm-hmm. There is a question from Randa Al-Alami from Sanjenta. In most farms, we plant aromatic and medicinal plants to encourage the pollination. How to choose the right species to plant near the crops? Is there any reference or studies about this?
I'm not an expert for aromatic plants, and we used mainly in our trials, we used other vegetable crops, spices, oil seeds, and sometimes forage crops. But we did not work a lot with medicinal plants. But I know that there is literature from India, and I suggest to check the literature from India and test which plants work also here in Morocco.
Yes. There are no other questions. I have a question. You did start, so you started already some the communication efforts around this initiative, about FAB initiative, a few years ago. Now, did you get some indicators about the impact of this communication effort in Morocco, for example?
No, we know that, for instance, FAB farmers do their own experiments. Yeah, they use FAB also for other crops. But we plan a big impact assessment in the last year, which is 23. We had a lot of trouble because of COVID, because we trained the ONCA advisors. But then we got COVID, and the advisors could not do as many farmer trainings as they wanted to do. And so we have delay in outscaling, and we postponed, therefore, also the impact assessment. We have good figures from Algeria. They did a small impact assessment on adoption, and that was really very encouraging. But from Morocco, I don't know currently.
Okay, but you have some indicators for assessing your
yes. In the project there are several indicators to measure the success. This is, for instance, farmers adopting the approach, or hectare restored.
Oh, okay, perfect. So, is there any other questions from the audience?
No, it is not a questions, but congratulations for this topic. I'm Professor Badi Aliousi from University of Fez. Thank you for this excellent approaches, because I am working in beekeeper, and I am in the scientific committee of Apimondia. It is very interesting with apitourism. We would like to make apitourism with this with pollination. So it will be a good approach to make a collaboration in this aspect, and also to promote some communications with agricultors, beekeepers, in order to have organic agriculture, because we have the problem of pesticide, like neonicotinoids, which induce a loss of bees. We don't know until now what is the problem of this disparition of bees.
Yes, I fully agree. And I think the beekeepers, because they have high reputation in their area, if we would provide the knowledge on FAB to all beekeepers, and the beekeepers would promote it just with the farmers they communicate with, this would help a lot. I really think that the beekeepers are a strategic group for us, and that would be a good alliance.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this excellent topic. Thank you. I will be happy to collaborate with the group in these aspects. Thank you.
So one of the main purposes of this webinar series is to do some networking. Yes, you can get in touch with Dr. Stefanie if you are interested. Perfect.
Okay. Yeah, I have some
Okay. Yes,
someone who has been from Rabat, and he has been in Sofru, and he make monitoring with some types of pollinators, and he makes some collection in order to study the type of pollinator, but I don't remember the name. I will check and I will send you the name. He is from ICARDA, from Rabat.
Laila Hamroud?
No, he is a man from France. I don't know the...
Patrick Lom.
Yes, Patrick. Yes.
Patrick, yeah.
He had been in my farm, and we make some collection of some insects in order to study the type of pollination. Okay, yes. Thank you.
Welcome. If somebody wants to ask or to comment, you can raise your hand, your electronic hand in Zoom. If not, we are reaching the end of this webinar. I would like to thank you, Dr. Stefanie Christmann. I would like to mention to everyone that, as usual, you will get a very short survey to get your assessment of this webinar series when you will leave the webinar, the session. Please fill it; it will be helpful. At the end of this questionnaire, you can request your attendance certificate for those who want it. Finally, on behalf of the organizers, I would like to thank everyone who participated today and also people who commented and asked their questions. And thanks especially our guest speaker, Dr. Stefanie Christmann, for her rich talk and rich answers to the questions. I would like to thank also Dr. Iman Hamil Alami for her great contribution to prepare this webinar and also to introduce our speaker. I would like also to thank warmly my colleagues Boutaina Abidou, Uthman Sabbatar, Dati Razi, Nurdin Bahri, Abdelaziz Yasri, and all the scientific committee of the INRA webinar series for their crucial contribution in the organization of this series. Dr. Stefanie, you would like to say something? Or Dr. Iman also, Hamil Alami?
I just want to thank for this great opportunity. Yeah. I would like we would have such opportunities with more institutions here in Morocco. Thank you.
Thanks to you. Dr. Hamil Alami, you would like to say?
Yes, I don't know. Yes. Thank you. I would like to thank another time our colleague Stefanie, and I am sure that we will do progress in this field of pollinator, which is very important for our country, and especially with this problem of the disappearance of the bees in that time related to the climate change and the biodiversity. And I am happy to collaborate with her, and we will do the best, our best. And thank you very much for organizing this this nice series of webinar. I thank you all of the organization and the programmation of this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hamil Alami, Dr. Christmann. I got another question from a participant about the participation certificate, the attendance certificate. You will get the opportunity to ask for it when leaving the webinar. You will fill the survey And then at the end of this survey, you can click to ask for this attendance certificate. Thank you. So the next webinar is scheduled in a month, in exactly the 14th of July, sorry, with another exciting topic. Thank you all. See you next month.